Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those in the West Coast. We're very pleased to have you all with us
Recording
today.
in progress.
I'm going to just give a few more seconds for our attendees to stream in, as I see the numbers are increasing here. And I'll take care of some of the administrative things offhand. We do have French interpretation. Il y a interprétation à le français, la chaîne de français à the bottom of your screen. We will also be recording this event. We do recognize that it is Yom Kippur and it's also Mexico's Independence Day. So we appreciate all of those that are joining us, and we will also have this recorded in both English and French and made available on our website, ccacanada.com, as well as links available on our Twitter at ccacanada later today or first thing but tomorrow morning. So thank you all. And now I'd like to just welcome our candidates. It's a pleasure to have with us in alphabetical order. We have Michael Coteau, from the Liberal candidate from Don Valley East. We've got Stephanie Kusie from the Conservative Party candidate in Calgary, Midnapore, and Heather McPherson, NDP candidate from Edmonton, Strathcona. So thank you all for being with us. And as we've mentioned to our participants and this is really meant to be a conversation on some of the issues that are most pertinent to our CCA audience and stakeholders from across Canada, the hemisphere, and as well as Europe. When inviting the parties to this event, we really wanted to make it clear that it was meant to be a substantive conversation to educate our attendees on the thinking towards the region. And so we've asked our candidates to keep in mind that you keep that in mind and be as concise as possible, as we have a lot of areas to cover, as most of our stakeholders and our members recognize. The hemisphere is not one that's often discussed during election campaigns and often through just in general in Canada. So we very much appreciate having this time with party delegates to get some thinking on it. And so with that in mind, I will, if anybody has any questions or anything, please do send them in the Q&A. And we will do our best to integrate some of them, time permitting. So with that, I will open it up to our first question, which is, I would like to sort of get started on Canada's role and position in the region, and have sort of some of the thinking behind each of your parties' platforms on how should Canada position itself to be an influential player, particularly given some increased activity in the region from other foreign powers, among them namely sort of China, Russia, who don't necessarily share Canadian values and interests. And sort of what's the thinking on that? So I'll start with Heather, if you wouldn't mind starting, and then we'll move on from there. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for the question, Marta. Thank you for everyone for being here today, and of course, thank you to the other candidates that are coming forward to speak about their party's position as we go forward into the next 4 days of before our federal election. So I'm the critic for international development and the deputy critic for foreign affairs for the NDP, or I was in the last parliament. And so I want to talk about Canada's role in the world a bit writ large, and then focus down a little bit on some of the things that are particular for this. You know, Canada's role in the world is deeply diminished from what it has been. I think it's deeply diminished from what I think most Canadians think that our role in the world is. Over the last several decades, in fact, we have had an increasingly diminished role in the world. That's articulated by things like our failure to to secure a Security Council seat. Our lowest level ever of official development assistance that we're seeing right now, with Canada being really quite embarrassingly low compared to that promise of 0.07% of GNI. Our role in terms of peacekeeping is diminished. We have a government that has currently had promised to have approximately 850 peacekeepers deployed. We have 58 about that are deployed at the moment. So well under what we had been told was coming. We no longer invest in things like electoral observation and building democracies around the world, especially in Latin America. Obviously, our arms sales that we've seen to places like Colombia, to places like Yemen have been a massive problem, and we really do need to be ashamed of Canada should be ashamed of its role in fueling some of these international conflicts, these human rights abuses. And then, in Latin America, some of the specific things that I think we really need to look at, and I mean, I can dive deep into a lot of these different topics. It's a pretty big question, but you look at our failure to support democracy in many countries. You look at our failure to ensure that Canadian companies working in many of these countries are working ethically. We have a mining industry that is amongst the worst in the world for human rights abuses. We have to invest more in our development. We have to invest more in strengthening democracies in Latin America and South American countries. We have to be looking at human rights and how we are protecting women and girls and how we are strengthening those economic opportunities for populations. And then, I mean, it would be a mistake at this point in time to not recognize as well that COVID has had really deep impacts. And I know we're going to touch on COVID later, but I think, there can be no discussion about Canada's role in the world in 2021, where we are right now, without recognizing the impact COVID has had, that COVID has kicked the gains we've made over the last 30 years away, that we have increasing poverty, we have increasing violence, we have increasing insecurity around the world. So Canada has a lot of work that we need to do. And we can do that. We have been that middle-sized, playing above our weight. We have the potential to do that again. And the fact that we have let ourselves become so diminished is, I think, something that I lay squarely at the feet of both the federal Conservative and Liberal governments.
Thank you, Heather. Michael, if I could go to you next with that same question. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. And I want to start by saying how much I appreciate this opportunity. I've been a provincial member of parliament for the last 9 years, and weighing in on issues outside the country has not been something I've had a lot of opportunity to weigh in on. So, talking about the Caribbean and the Americas, to me is just it's an extraordinary opportunity. And I look at it from the perspective of not only as a Canadian, but as someone who's my father's from Grenada, and I have a Caribbean link, and I look at it from that perspective as well. And one of the things I can say starting off right away, that I think Canadians should be very proud of their relationship with the Americas. I think that if you look around a city like mine, or even a community like mine, Don Valley East, you'll see a large population of people who are from the Americas. I know that happens right across this country. In Ontario, I believe we have 800,000 people alone that would identify as Caribbean. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to continue to build on that relationship by leveraging that diversity that makes up this great country. When you ask people in my province or any province across this great country or territory, they would say that building a relationship with the Americas is an important thing, not only for our as a region when it comes to protection and safety, but also looking into the economy of the future, looking into huge industries like tourism, but then looking for ways to actually leverage that diversity to build upon things like that industry and commerce, but focusing on things like climate change, focusing on COVID, focusing on international development and infrastructure, there are some huge opportunities that present themselves to us as Canadians, but also as citizens of the Americas, to actually increase those relationships by taking on some of the biggest challenges that we have. And I think a Liberal government today and in the past have always looked for ways to be a good partner in the Americas, to look for ways to assist and to build and to learn. And I think that now, especially with the challenges in front of us, like the protection of human rights, both individual, collective rights, looking at climate change and the battle against COVID, it gives us a unique opportunity to refocus and to rethink that strategy. And I think conversations like this are really important when it comes to developing that pathway forward. So I'm very excited to even be part of this conversation today. And hopefully, if things go right on Monday, I can join two colleagues here and look for ways as a legislature to find solutions for the Americas to better position our country, but the region as a whole.
Thank you, Michael. And Stephanie, I'll give you the last word on this particular question. So Canada's role and position in the region.
Thank you very much, Marta. Merci, Marta. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Je suis Stephanie Kusie, l'ancienne députée de Calgary, Midnapore, et currently le candidat pour Calgary, Midnapore, currently the candidate, conservative candidate, I should say, here in Calgary, Midnapore. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. Ça m'a fait un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup. Muchísimas gracias también. Thank you so much for being here today. Yeah, so I have a bit of a background within the region. I was at Foreign Affairs for close to 15 years. And throughout that time, the majority of my time was spent focused on the Americas. So I started with a temporary duty in Buenos Aires. And after this, I spent 2 years as chargé in El Salvador, which was an incredible experience. And then finally, I was Canadian consul in Dallas, Texas. And since I'm from Alberta, that's not a big stretch, for 3 years as well, with some assignments at home in between that, one of that being for Peter Kent as his policy officer for the Americas when he served as Minister of State for the Americas in the Harper administration. So this is definitely a region that does have a lot of interest and is very dear to me. And Marta, I know you'll keep me honest if I get too political here, but I will say sort of my feeling regarding Canada's approach to the Americas really hasn't changed in the 13 years since I've served in Minister Kent's office. And at that time, we had the policy of the Americas strategy, and it was based upon 3 simple values. One was democracy, I think something that we can all ascribe to, and certainly something that is held in very high esteem and promoted in the Parliamericas group, on which I sit as a councillor currently in the House of Commons, or I should say prior to the dissolution of Parliament. Justice, of course, which I think also includes human rights, the rule of law, these types of things. And the third was a little bit more tenuous. It was labeled as prosperity, which I understand I would get a few snide comments from those that didn't really like the title, but I think the idea behind it was the promotion of free markets, stable markets, these 3 principles, good economics. And so it was these 3 principles that guided us in this time of administration and really did us well and determined all of the policy decisions that we made, whether they were bilateral, whether they were multilateral, whether they were aid determined, whether they were, we stay in an accord, we get out in accord. We had a guiding document with guiding values for all of the decisions that we've made. And I really think, and again, please, Marta, please stop me if I do get too political here. This is what we have been missing in the last 6 years, in the most recent government administration, is a clear outline of Canadian values, which we are looking to implement not only within the Americas, but across the globe. I don't even think there has been a cohesive foreign policy, personally, myself, as previously as a diplomat, but I think this is what we need again, is to have a clear set of Canadian values, which which are outlined. And I will say our platform includes these very ideas. If I were to compare, the foreign strategy, foreign affairs platform of say 2011, I won't say 6, but 11, and maybe the one we have here today with Aaron O'Toole, I don't think that they would be very different. A last comment, Marta, would be, it's interesting to me because in the question it said, given the increased activity in the region of other foreign powers. And it's very interesting to me because if I had to highlight one weakness, I thought, of the previous conservative administration, these powers were present there. Russia was influencing Cuba. China was attempting to influence in Cuba. Of course, we've seen this spread throughout the globe much more significantly with their Belt and Road Initiative. But also, I think of a nation like Brazil. I was in Honduras for the 2009 coup. And I remember sort of seeing the Brazilians were very instrumental because they were hiding a previous leader of power within their embassy at the time. And this was a time when they were really coming of age in terms of they were up to host the Olympics. They were up to host the Soccer World Cup, which is really the two biggest events of the world. But my point is, they were also at a time where they were also under these different foreign influence as well. China, specifically, when I think of, for example, at the time, soy exports. So I think these threats existed at that time. And I think that the challenges remain, they've only increased, but I believe the answer to them, Marta, is to have clear Canadian values outlined, because I don't think that this has even been done in the last 6 years, and to live these consistently within our foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we will come back. I know all of you have mentioned sort of democracy and human rights, and have also mentioned climate change and COVID. We will come back to those, but I would like to sort of ask a few questions that are on specific countries or even sort of regions, sub-regions within the hemisphere. The first one being on Venezuela. So essentially over the past several years, Canada has staunchly supported Juan Guaido as the interim president. So I'd like to open the floor to your comments on this policy, and then also going forward, considering the opposition's now willingness to participate in the upcoming November elections, what role or what should Canada's policy towards Venezuela be, and what could that look like? Keeping in mind some of those comments that were made about human rights, about democracy going forward in the region. So if you could work that in a little bit, I'd appreciate it. Michael, if we could open with you on this one, please. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the question. You know, as Canadians, I think we have a responsibility not only to our country, but to the entire region to ensure that the protection of human rights is maintained, and that democracy is something that is reflected in the region. And I think Venezuela is a perfect example of a country that can use the assistance of Canadians, and we can participate in looking for ways to reflect that democracy. I think the policy to recognize the interim president was the right policy, and building those types of relationships from government to government to look for ways to assist is the right thing to do. And I think that we should, as a country and as a government, look for ways to assist in any type of democratic transferring of power, as observers, as providing policy advice. But the direction we're going in to recognize the current interim president and moving forward is the right direction.
Thank you, Michael. Stephanie, could I go to you next?
Oh, am I unmuted?
No, you're perfect.
Oh, excellent. Okay, thank you so much. You know, so of course, sort of building upon what I just said in terms of having the belief of truly standing behind democracy, rule of law, human rights. Certainly the position of my party has always been that we were completely against the Maduro regime previously. And so I actually think, sort of following along the thinking of Ben Roswell, the creation of the Lima Group was the way to go through peaceful resolution, peaceful solutions, especially given the difficulty working within the confinements of the OAS, given the entire membership roster. So I think that the Lima Group was a very good way to go. And the only problem that I have with the leadership is that it's largely maintained once again because of the negative foreign influences, Russia and China. So I think that Canada needs to work closer within the Lima Group, or I should say, work to have more influence, to work with a stronger voice within the Lima Group to pressure the other member nations, to come up with peaceful solutions, but again, with that focus on democracy, the rule of law, and working towards, again, these values instilled within Venezuela itself, but not only instilled within Venezuela itself, but independent from other negative influences of other nations which do not hold these values dear and do not enact them in their global mandates. So this would be my suggestion. Is it was good to go through the Lima process. I think that's good. I don't think we have been, there has been certainly been, again, from time to time, some social media communications, but I really don't think that we have acted with the strength, with the and the will to search for again peaceful solutions, but again pushing more for these values to, as I said, not only maintain these values within Venezuela, but to keep them independent of these other nations which do not hold these values. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Marta. I'm gonna be the outlier here. There's a few things that I want to say about Venezuela, and the first thing is they are the Venezuelans are an independent country. They have every right to select their own leader, to go through their own democratic processes. And I don't think that the Canadian government, I think the Liberal government made a huge mistake when they actually invited Guaido to come and be in our House of Commons and recognize him. I think what our role is to ensure that there is more support for a democratic process, more support to ensure that there are free, fair, and transparent election systems in place. Clearly there has been a massive failure with the current path we've been on. The Lima Group is deeply flawed. There's some flaws there. When we don't even have representation from Argentina and Mexico participating. We don't have, there's some real questions about whether or not the Lima Group even has the legitimacy to be promoting the democratization of the Venezuelan system. We have over 500,000 Venezuelans who have fled the country because they don't have enough to eat, because there is such incredible violence, because they can't access medical supports and care. The violence that's being perpetrated on these refugees in Colombia and other countries is phenomenal. Clearly, the path that has been taken has been a failure. It has failed the Venezuelan people. What needs to happen is we need to actually be there to help the Venezuelans as they rebuild their country, as there is a rebuilding of the democracy. We need to be investing in making sure that there is free and fair elections, that we are there to observe and to assist in declaring these free and fair elections. Our job is not to decide who should be ruling Venezuela. Our job is to support the people of Venezuela to help choose who should be ruling the country of Venezuela. So I'm gonna be a little bit pointy on that, and I guess too, like to Stephanie's point, obviously we were looking for a peaceful a peaceful process. That's not what happened. It has been anything but a peaceful process. So the path that we were on wasn't working. That was the wrong path for the Venezuelan people. The attacks on human rights, the attacks on women and girls have been spectacularly violent and widespread. And Canada really does need to do a much better job with regards to Venezuela than we have done. And we should certainly never be inviting somebody like Guaido to come into the House of Commons and recognize him as a government, as the head of the government.
Okay, thanks. Heather, I just do want to have one quick follow-up on that, because you're saying the Lima group and all, and sort of the NDP was obviously not sort of, or came late to the party in terms of not recognizing Venezuela as sort of being democratic right now. Would you classify Venezuela as a democracy right now? Or with this upcoming election, would you classify it as a democracy? I'm sort of then going to go into more of the democracy and human rights question that we have upcoming, but if you could speak a little bit more and expand on that a little bit with respect to Venezuela.
Yeah, we're in a tricky, Venezuela is in a very tricky situation right now, of course. And so right now it is a very, very fragile democratic process. You know, even the recognition of the sort of the implicit, I guess, recognition by the European Union that the Venezuelan democracy is following the letter of the law. You know, even that is pretty fraught at the moment. So I would say that I look forward to having this democratic process go through and it being robust and it being managed in an appropriate manner. But I do have some serious concerns about whether or not that will be the case.
Okay, thank you. I will now go to the question on democracy and human rights, if you don't mind, so we can sort of just stick to this topic, because this has actually been stated as a cornerstone of Canadian foreign policy for decades, not just now, but and from sort of all parties. There have been sort of, how would you really balance these policy priorities with current on the ground realities in several of the countries? So we did just speak about Venezuela, but there are other countries across the region that may or may not be sort of seen as democratic, and democracy sort of deteriorating within them, as well as human rights. So if you can speak a little bit to, I'll just mention a few, such as, you know, there's also Nicaragua. I'm going to shy away a little bit from Cuba, but there's also been questions about El Salvador. But if you can sort of speak to what your party's thinking is in terms of how to uphold those and how you would work towards those sort of across the region, and how you would implement them. Thanks. If we could start with Stephanie, if we could start with you on this one. Thanks.
Sure. Well, thank you, Marta. And as you know, someone who previously lived in El Salvador, again, this is very personal for me. And I actually feel really lucky because I lived in El Salvador really at the height of the Arena government. And so this, of course, since it was kind of right of center, or center right, it had very close ties with the United States. And actually I was there for the 15-year celebration of the peace of the Civil War. And so my point is, you know, even though there were individuals with machine guns on every corner of the street, it really, I think, was one of the times of greatest peace and prosperity in the recent history of El Salvador. And at the expense of sounding like a broken record, again, I think it comes back to, as I said, focusing, first of all, defining those values, and which we've talked about, are democracy, human rights, the rule of law. But as I said, we had the America strategy. So again, going back to a strategy which we stick to for all of our decisions, and the implementation of these values within all of these decisions, because I think that nations follow when they see leadership. They feel less isolated. I think there is a good reason that so many individuals from these undemocratic nations want to come to Canada, of course, and this is because they see a model of democracy where human rights are respected, where justice is respected. And so why shouldn't we be strong about these values and promote them and stick to them, whether it be deciding, making decisions around aid or government support, promoting these values relentlessly. And I guess another thing I'll say is I'm really, historically we've had bilateral relations, we've had multilateral relations. I'm really interested in these microlateral relations and how this has sort of become a new trend. And I see this as a new way to look for mini regional coalitions of support for more of these undemocratic nations. And I guess finally, I'll say, I think we're still evaluating the world order is settling after COVID. We're not even out of COVID as of yet. And so things have not progressed to how I thought they would in the world. I thought we would see a lot of movement away from China, both from a trade perspective as well as their influence within the sphere. I thought we'd see regions turn a lot more internally. I think we saw that with Europe initially, but we're not seeing it as much. So I think we're still waiting for things to settle before we really sort of see the lay of the land in terms of the best way to approach things. But I really stand by identifying core values and adhering to them. And it sounds so simple, and it's become, because it is, and because as I've mentioned previously, I genuinely don't believe that we have done this in the last 6 years. I believe that foreign policy has been, if non-existent, ad hoc and reactive. And this is just not the way to conduct foreign relations for a strong Canada, for a strong world, or for a strong Latin America. So those would be my thoughts, Marta.
Thanks, Stephanie. Michael, I'm going to give the word to you because there were a couple of comments about the last 6 years in there that Stephanie remarked on. So if you'd like to comment on those or otherwise.
So one thing that Stephanie said that I would agree on is the values that Canadians have to be part of that process of relationship building in the Americas. I think, foreign policy has to be a value-driven process based on things we actually believe in, things that we're fighting for. I would say when it comes to issues like climate change, when it comes to gender issues, sexual reproduction and health rights, when it comes to capital investment and fairness, when it comes to freeing up money for investments, when it comes to foreign aid, these issues are huge issues that are driving a lot of the success or unsuccess in many regions in the Americas. If we have a government that does not believe in climate change and they expect to go into the Americas and talk about issues, and at their core, they're not a government that believes in climate change, how do you say that to a president of a country where that hasn't done anything to increase the CO2 emissions? They don't have a heavy industry, but they're suffering the most from climate change when the water levels are rising, when storms are increasing, when they're feeling the blunt force of climate change, and we benefit from it as larger industrial nations. Climate change has to be on the table. When it comes to gender rights and sexual reproduction and health rights, these are important issues. And you know that the Trudeau government made a huge commitment to this. Foreign aid is another mechanism to help continue development. We've had past leaders, for example, in the Conservative Party, propose cutting foreign aid by 25%. These are important issues. So if you're going to be a values-driven government and you're going to go forward with values at your core, I think you have to be on the right side of the page. And I think that there are folks out there that would like to change government that don't share those same values. And when it comes to COVID, climate change, these big issues that are here, they have to be part of that conversation. You have to be on the right side of those issues.
Thanks, Michael. Heather, did you want to make a final comment on this one?
Sure. Yeah. I think we're going down that political path that you maybe didn't want us to go down. But I will say that I am going to push back on that a little bit, Michael. It isn't just the conservative government that hasn't done our values. It is the liberal government. You have not contributed to our ODA. What we need to see in Latin America is a real investment. We need to see some, that investment in bilateral relationships and bilateral rebuilding. If we're looking at democracy, if we're looking at rebuilding these democracies that are failing or failed, there's a few ways to do that, and making sure that there is economic development in these communities is a massive part of that. Making sure that women and girls have a seat at the table is a massive part of that. Investing in these communities will make it much easier for those democratic institutions to survive and for democracy to continue to survive. But what we have seen is a bit of a failure of leadership. And I talked about this off the start. We are looking at a situation where Canadian mining companies are allowed to go into these communities and do whatever they want. There is state-sanctioned violence happening by Canadian mining companies in Latin America. Like that is indisputable. And there has been subsequent conservative and liberal governments who have failed to deal with that. We have a core ombudsperson who has never been given the mandate to do its job. We have a body that was set in place under the Harper Conservatives within global affairs. They've investigated 7 cases in 21 years. Like it's just, outrageous that that is still happening. We saw arms sales going to these different communities. Colombia is a perfect example. We have arms being sold that is fueling a civil war in Colombia that is being used against the people of Colombia by the government, and it is being done with Canadian arms sales. Like this is outrageous. So when we talk about values, I will say that the Liberal government is really good at saying the right values, but they don't appear to be acting on it. And I hate to be political and make it less about policy and more about parties, but come on, you can't keep saying Canada's back. You can't keep saying that we're gonna play a meaningful role in the world and have diminished ODA, diminished supports for countries as they recover from COVID-19, announce the same $2.65 billion for mitigation and adaptation for climate change about 47 times. This is not this isn't helping people in Latin America, and it certainly isn't helping Canada in terms of our role in the world. And I know, okay, Marta, you'll have to pass that back to Michael for a rebuttal, because I know I got too political there. I get cross.
Michael, did you want to say anything, or can I actually ask that sort of in response to that, I would say, okay, so what are the proposals to not make that happen, or to keep any of these things that either any of the parties have in contrast, or that would like to, you're saying things that have happened over the past several years, but what would be your proposals in terms of how to mitigate that, or mitigate any of these sort of quote unquote issues that you see within the region? And I'm not going to open that up right now, but I think if we could just keep that in mind for the questions going forward, I would really appreciate it. With that in mind, though, I would like to invite, we do have Julio Rivas with us, who's one of our attendees, and he's Julio, if you're there, I did get your questions. I will open the mic to him. Julio Rivas is a journalist from EFE News, and he's been looking at the region from within Canada for a while now. And I'd like to open the mic to him if I can find him just quickly. Julio, if you can just, Julio, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me now?
I can, thank you. So Julio, I'll give you the floor if you can be concise and go ahead with your questions.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Marta, and thank you, the Canadian Council of the Americas, for making this possible. So I have, if possible, I have 3 questions, one for each of the candidates. And if you don't mind, I'm going to start with Heather. It's the first one that appears in my screen. So thank you, Heather, for taking time. The MDP platform has not, unless that I'm wrong, has not a single line about foreign affairs policies. Since the NDP has not been in power, don't you think that the DP should be including a little bit more about foreign affairs policies that the NDP government would implement, and more specifically about Latin America, the hemisphere?
Well, that's a great question, Julio. And to be honest, we have an 8-point platform that we have for foreign affairs and for international development. I helped write it, so I know it pretty intimately. It's not in our public document that went out just because we don't have enough space, and unfortunately, I was really happy this election that, for example, Afghanistan became a policy issue that people wanted to talk about during the election. But unfortunately, foreign affairs and international development rarely becomes, a ballot box issue. So I, as somebody who has worked in international development and in foreign affairs for most of my career, I am always disappointed that there is less of that conversation, which is why today's event is so important. But we do have an 8-point plan of that we shared with the sector, that I've been interacting with the sector and made sure that they were very aware of. It's not, like I said, in the published plan just because of scope, but some of the things that are in that plan that I think are really important as we go forward are looking at our response to COVID, for example, and making sure that we have that 1%. The sector has been asking for a long time that the 1% of GNI is spent on a COVID recovery globally. That's vital to me. Another piece that's in there is that we would need to get our international development up to 0.7% GNI. Now, I'm not expecting that to happen in the first year, but there does need to be a predictable set calendar for how our ODA would increase over time. We have a really robust plan on working with healthcare and strengthening healthcare systems around the world, including things like making sure that we are waiving the IP requirements for the COVID vaccine temporarily as we get through this terrible global pandemic. That we would be making sure that there is more support for the Gavi initiative, more support for initiatives that will get the vaccines into people's arms around the world. It's the only way that we will recover both economically and socially from COVID-19. So those are some of the things that we needed to do. We will always have women and girls and human rights at the center of our work. We know that the best way we can combat climate change is by educating women and girls. We know the best way we can ensure economic growth in communities is by educating women and girls and encouraging them to be part of the economy. We know that looks like a full range of reproductive and health rights and opportunities. So ensuring that women and girls have access to all range of reproductive health products is an important piece of our platform. There's investment in food security, knowing that we have lost a lot of food security potential in the world, that extreme poverty has gone up enormously over the last number of, oh, sorry, Marta's interrupting.
That's okay.
I'm getting
really
long-winded,
short on time, so I do want to
Julio,
I'm
happy to share it with you later on if you need more information.
Yeah, I just don't want to keep it so general in terms of the region particularly. So I appreciate that, Heather. Julio, if you can ask the next two questions, if you can keep them a bit more concise to specific things on the region.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Thank you, Marta. Stephanie, hi. Nice meeting you virtually. Last time the Conservative Party was in power, the relationship with Mexico suffered a serious crisis. What would an Erin O'Toole government do to repair that relationship? And would you reimpose the visa requirements for Mexicans?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do recall that. That's very interesting. I was in actually Peter Kent's office at the time that was implemented, and but that very frankly, that's the only thing that stands out in my mind in terms of the stress of the relationship. Nonetheless, of course, I recognize that is a significant thing. And in fact, I, as a diplomat, faced retaliation of it in terms of my visa requirements to Mexico. I think that is behind us. I think that we are in a new era now of post-COVID, of negative influences in the world, and as well, a question we haven't gotten to yet, but Marta had put in the lineup, was the relationship between North America, Canada, US, and Mexico, characterizing the current relationship. And so I would say that we are in a time coming out of the Trump administration. Biden sort of seems to be carrying the same pro-American protectionist mentality. So I guess what I'm saying is that I struggle to think of what it was more than the visa, although significant. But I also think that it is, what year was that? 2009 one. So it's 12 years later. The global context has changed, but also the North American context has changed. Now, also the government in Mexico has changed, but I think that this is a time to look at the relationship and the places for synchronicity with fresh eyes, sort of keeping in mind the new context of the North American relationship, of the global situation. And as what has been a major theme throughout this call today, the rise of frankly dictators and anti-democratic behavior within the region. So I see that as one thing. It's behind us. It's a new environment. Let's the two of us move forward together.
Thank you, Stephanie. And finally, Michael, thank you for your time. Under Trudeau, Canada's foreign affairs policy towards Latin America has been basically focused on Mexico, except for a reaction to whatever is happening in Venezuela and Nicaragua. There has been basically no new initiatives to the rest of the region, and especially with the largest countries like Argentina, Brazil, Chile. Is that the Liberal policy, the status quo? There's nothing really new that the Liberal government can offer for the region?
Well, thank you so much for the question. So I'm a candidate running for the first time for the MP position in Don Valley East. Most of my political experience has been at the Ontario legislature. In regards to the specific policy of each country in Latin America, I wouldn't have the in-depth knowledge like my colleagues would have in regards to those specific relationships. But I do believe, that like the Caribbean and the Americas, there is huge opportunity for us to leverage the diversity that exists in this country. I was responsible for the Pan Am Games. I was the minister responsible for those games when they were here last in Toronto. And we had an incredible opportunity to attach an economic development piece to that. And we had many meetings leading up to the games and during the games with different leaders from the Americas. And it's leveraging opportunities like that on an ongoing basis consistently with all participants from all different regions that we can be doing to build our economy and to build the economies overseas. I think that, with the investments into, for example, the reproductive health, gender investments of the $14 billion over the next decade throughout by the Trudeau government, it's opportunities like that that open up our ability to work together and to strengthen different regions. And again, going back to climate change and foreign aid and economic development, regardless of where we reside and which country we're from in the Americas, climate change is perhaps the biggest challenge we'll have in front of us as many nations. And it's important for us to be on the same page, to attach those principal core values to our approach. And finally, if you look at the Liberal platform today, the first item that it speaks to is the protection of democracy and human rights as one of its primary pillars. I think that the government has a responsibility, regardless of which government forms in this country, They have a responsibility to protect democracy and to protect human rights, because it is part of Canadian values in the exact same way we have, I believe, an invested interest to protect our environment. And I can guarantee you that if the Liberal governments do form government, the protection of democratic and human rights, the protection of our climate, and the promotion of reproductive health rights and gender issues will be among the most important issues. And I think that's what would separate some parties from others.
Well, thank you very much to the three of you, and good luck next Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julio, and thank you all for taking the time to answer Julio's questions. So I just want to push a little bit on in terms of we've covered a lot of ground. I do recognize that we are running a little short on time here, and Heather has a hard stop at 1. Stephanie and Michael, if you can stay with us a few more minutes, that would be great. But I would like to push just a little bit. And one of the things that we've covered a lot of different topics. You've all sort of mentioned COVID, mentioned climate change, mentioned some other things. Going forward, one of my questions is, and one of the questions that we received actually from a former ambassador and high commissioner in the region, as well as the first head of the OAS unit for the promotion of democracy, Mr. John Graham. Essentially, sort of, how do you do this in the region, right? So relations are very important, and there's, you can't state how important face-to-face relations are. And one of the things that he mentioned in his question is that that's actually gone downhill, and it's been a multi-party issue, not just one party, not just over the last few years, but over probably the last sort of 20 to 30 years. So essentially his question is for many years, both Liberal and Tory governments appointed junior foreign ministers with specific responsibility for Latin America and the Caribbean. And while the results were occasionally mixed, most of the time the arrangement worked. So the difficulty in overstating the effectiveness of this face-to-face high-level contact. What would you sort of say, and how would you say that the priorities are in Ottawa, and how you would manage some of these other issues that you've brought up? So whether it's on COVID, whether it's on democracy, whether it's on human rights, how do you move that forward if you don't prioritize that in Ottawa, and how would you go about doing that? So if I could ask you to speak specifically to that rather than sort of other parties and what's happened in the past, that would be helpful. So I think, Heather, we'll start with you, because I do recognize that you have to end at 2 p.m. So thanks.
Sure. And I'll try to be quick, so I'm not talking till 2 p.m. I think that the way forward, I think the question is really astute, in that it talks about these relationship building and working on those relationships. And I think that's really important. And they take time, they are long term. And they do take a lot of work and a lot of effort. And of course, we have seen cuts to our consular service, our diplomatic corps, and it has damaged Canada's ability to improve the relationships around the world. We need to recommit to multilateralism. We need to push back against, some of the narratives we've seen in the last few years. We saw under the Trump administration his disdain for multilateralism. We need to reinvest in multilateralism. And if nothing, COVID should have shown us this. We are facing massive global issues that are not just specific to Latin America, but that are global in scope, and they are going to require global solutions. We are going to have to work in a much more cohesive, much more multilateral way. And so investment in that and recognition of that, I think, is really important. I've grappled with this question a lot. lot because I am somebody who comes from this background. Of course, our political system, our electoral politics don't always work really well for these global decision making and global solution finding structures because we live on these short 4-year or sometimes 2-year electoral cycles, and it's very complex. But what I would say is that it is not an easy solution. I'm not going to say we're going to invest A, B, and C and do 1, 2, and 3. It's that this is a long-term process where we need to see Canada as hitting above its weight in the world and see Canada as a player on that multilateral stage. Work with our allies. We are not the biggest player in the playground. Work with our allies, work collaboratively, and do solution building that way, I think is our key.
Now I was on mute. Apologies. Stephanie, if I could go to you next, please. Stephanie?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Pardon me. So again, I think this is an excellent question. I've so much respect for John Graham. I brought up Ben Roswell previously, and I'm very lucky to serve on the Trilateral Commission with other greats of foreign affairs, such as John Manley as well. But if I had to say, a major thing that I would change from my time working in the Harper administration in 2009, which I think is critical to Mr. Graham's question, is engagement. I think engagement is incredibly important. And this was a major criticism of mine when I was in Mr. Kent's office, or Minister Kent's office at the time. And that is, for example, a policy that the Harper administration had in the majority of situations where they did not interlock with leaders of undemocratic nations. And I think that has to change. I think dialogue has to begin somewhere. Again, in 2009, when I went to the United Nations in an attempt to advocate for Canada's position on the Security Council in the 2009 race, not the more recent one by Prime Minister Trudeau, I had conversations with the ambassadors to the UN of all different nations. And I think that is, I think just engagement and a willingness to dialogue is very important. So this is a major thing that it doesn't mean that you can't have principles. It doesn't mean that you can't be principled. It doesn't mean that you can't implement these principles in all of your conversations, decision-making, actions, steps that you take. But I really believe engagement is critical.
Thank you, Stephanie. Michael.
So I agree with both members that engagement, relationship building, that type of discourse is so necessary. And it's not just going to happen in the House of Commons and committees. It's going to happen, face to face, and building relationships based on issues that we have mutual interest on. But I also would like to add that we have a huge opportunity in front of us. My father is from a small island in the Caribbean called Kusie, 7,000 people. It's 24 square kilometers. It's a very small island. Industry used to be, agriculture, and the industry is not. It's maybe a bit of tourism, but it's not the same as what it was originally. With the changing economy, with automation, with the change of even the way money is distributed, the shift in smart agriculture, looking at renewable and clean energy. There are so many opportunities that present themselves for small islands like Kusie and also large countries like Canada. We have an opportunity as a region to work together to position this region for economic development, for a better quality of life, and for the opportunities of the future. And that's where that engagement and relationship is going to be developed, on focusing on the challenges, but also focusing on the new opportunities that present themselves. And I believe that's partially the way forward when we build these new relationships and our recommitment to the Americas.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. I do know
I just
that
want to say goodbye. Yeah, thank you very much for this great conversation. Nice to see
Appreciate it.
everybody.
Thanks so much, Heather.
Good luck.
Yeah. So before we close, we have been receiving a multitude of different questions, both in the chat as well as in the Q&A. I've tried to integrate some of them as best possible. And I'm thinking that instead of trying to integrate more of them, I would just like to ask one more quick question on sort of if there's anything that you would like to mention on North America and the trilateral relationship between Canada, US, and Mexico, and sort of how would you characterize that current relationship and moving forward? There's been several questions about Mexico that have come up, and so I leave that as a broad question to each of you, but if you'd like to sort of answer within your individual party platforms focus areas for that trilateral relationship, appreciate it.
Can I jump in, Stephanie? Is that
yeah,
okay?
please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think this relationship is obviously a really important relationship. The relationship between Canada and America, the United States and Canada and Mexico, really as large economies in the Americas, really sets the stage for many other discussions around our economic development and direction forward. I think that, you know, when we get it right from a trilateral perspective, when it comes to something like climate change, it has a large impact in the region as a whole. So that relationship is quite important. I think that with the election of Biden, I think under a Trudeau government, there is an alignment in direction when it comes to the fight against COVID, when it comes to renewables, when it comes to fighting climate change. And I think that that's a huge opportunity for us as a region. So that relationship is important because it will influence the relationships, I think, you know, and the impact in the Americas as a whole.
Sorry, Stephanie, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Stephanie.
Pardon me. I have very little to add in addition to the response that I gave earlier in terms of to the Hefty news outlet. And so, yeah, I think I'll leave it there in terms of, as I outlined, the uniqueness of our two neighbors, the places that they are in, the necessity, I think, to re-examine the relationship in the post-COVID environment. And yeah, I was sort of satisfied with what I said before. So I'll leave it there, Marta.
Okay, thank you so much. So with that, I want to thank you each of you again for being with us. I hope that this will continue conversations moving forward. Wish each of you luck in your individual ridings, and we look forward to working with all of the parties moving forward. So thank you all, and thanks to all of our attendees for joining us today. Our event will be posted both in English and in French. The recordings will be available on our website, ccacanada.com, as well as on our Twitter. You'll find the links at CCA Canada. So with that, thank you again, and good afternoon to all.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Muchísimas gracias. Obrigada. See you later. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.